Yeah, if you can just come up here if you have questions, or if you're too shy.
You're wonderful.
Thank you.
You just changed my life a little bit. You know what? I forget how it worked, but okay. What it was the comment about the people that let it go. Okay. When I was a kid, growing up in Chinatown, I got tied to a fence when I crossed over to North Beach, and they water ballooned me. Oh my God. And I used to feel bad and hate Italians. Natural, right? Okay. But then I never thought about it this way. What about the people that were watching? Right. And some were Chinese and some were not, and I didn't focus on them till today. Thank you.
But don't hate them.
No. Well, I think I'm a minister. I love everybody, right? But I think we what I enjoyed listening, because I think we have to go to a new level. Some of us old school. We're good at old school though, right? But we give our bodies on the line. But in a way, it's got to be a new way. Angela, so I went to Asian Law Caucus dinner, and you had a great speaker there, and someone goes, we shall not be used. We all had to sing that. Maybe you weren't there yet. Maybe 30 years ago too, same thing. But that's the Asian American myth stuff that's coming back again, so that it makes the other groups get jealous. But just I want to say that the poverty in Chinatown, for example, I mean, people are living in closets, 8 by 10 rooms. I mean, extreme poverty. And we try to get the media to uplift some of those stories. They don't want to, right? But that's right. We're around Cam, and you guys can do it. New blood.
Any thoughts to Reverend Fong's comment?
It's a new day, right?
It's a new day. Any other folks have questions out there? Please come up.
Yeah, my name is John Wong, and I had a question for you, I guess, or more a statement. I understand restorative justice and what it means, the merits of it, and all. But Judge Kaufman, who presided over the case, that's what he believed in as well, and basically left the two, perpetrators off without sending them to jail. I had a chance to sit with Curtis when he came to CCSF a few months ago, and we actually sat down with Judge Kaufman's daughter, who was a professor at City College, and she tried to she defended her father, saying restorative justice was the right thing to do in this case. I think many of us do not believe that is, right. And, maybe it was back then, but I think now obviously times have changed. But how can we make that right? Because a lot of people, first of all, Lily Chen, God rest her soul, and Curtis, everyone else who, was involved in the case and who, maybe just are hearing about the case now, saying, how in the world could they be let off? Restorative justice, that's what Judge Kaufman believed in. But, it's where can we find that middle road where, everyone can kind of just understand that, the past is the past, but now we have to maybe look at things, differently.
Great question. I knew that bringing up restorative justice with hate crimes would be quite controversial. So Judge Kaufman did not understand or know what restorative justice is. I mean, I don't know him, but from just hearing about the way he dealt with it, restorative justice is not letting someone go. Restorative justice is actually making the offender take a lot more responsibility than the criminal system could ever make them take. I don't think, and I've never heard of Lily Chen and the fiance and the family members being in a circle in a room with the two offenders, and the two offenders hearing directly from them what happened to them, and then for an agreement to take place where the offenders would then do their best they could to address the harm they've caused, although you can never bring a person back. Judge Kaufman, all he did was say, I'm just going to let these people go and not have them go through the criminal system at all. In the restorative justice world, one of the critiques you can say is that if someone doesn't follow through with their agreement, the fallback is actually going back into the criminal system. So if they had agreed to something, gone through that circle, it would have been extremely impactful on, I think, the two offenders and also everyone involved. And and they did not follow through with their agreement, they would actually have to go back through the criminal system. None of that happened in the Vincent Chin case. Restorative justice really, I don't think, had much awareness in the community at that time period. I think it is very much something that's spreading more and more here. In countries like New Zealand, they actually use it for all of their juvenile issues, including violent crime, because it was the Maori youth, the indigenous youth that were most impacted by the juvenile system. And what they found is it actually reduces reoffense rates. Putting someone in jail for or our prisons for a long period of time doesn't really teach them much once they're in the actual jail. Oftentimes they think of themselves as the victim and focus very much on themselves rather than the crime that they committed. And unfortunately, the way our prisons are organized, it's actually organized according to race and racial gangs. So you don't go in there and learn to hate less. You go in there and learn to hate a lot more.
I have a comment, and maybe it will turn into a question. My name is Sherilyn Lee, and I wrote a play about the Vincent Chin murder called Carry the Tiger to the Mountain. And I did a lot of research, and I know that actually when in the first federal civil rights case, one of the, although the stepson got off, the father was actually supposed to give some of his wages to Lily Chin. She never got a cent, and he deliberately never worked again, so she would never get any money. I don't think that they're, even if they had, she actually was in the courtroom all the time, and I don't think that she would have had a chance. I think there was so much animosity that there was not a chance for, I guess, what you would call restorative justice. I don't know if you feel right now that the criminal justice system being broken, do you feel that hate crimes, there should be a category of hate crimes? I guess that is my question now. What do you feel about that? Should there be extra penalties? Should there not be? What do we do about a crime that is committed? I know it's difficult to prove. I mean, I remember the Lily Chin in the play that I wrote. There's a whole section about, well, did they call him a nip, a gook, a chink? What did they call him? And that was sort of like one of the bases of just the frustration that Lily Chin felt because they couldn't figure out, well, what is the proper term that would show it's a hate crime? But I don't know. Do you think there should still be a category for hate crimes?
I'm going to bat this to my my colleague here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that to be most direct, yes, but I think we need to understand it in a particular way, meaning that we need to have a hate crimes definition to be able to, one, track the prevalence of the problem, and so we can understand what type of responses make the most sense. And without a definition in a particular way, we can't see that post 9/11 you have a huge spike of these types of violent incidents, for example, against the South Asian community. And so that's an important part of it. I think the second important part of it is that the crime is not just against the individuals, right? It's to send fear to an entire community. And so when someone sprays a swastika or uses a slur, it's intended to hurt that individual, but it's also to tell a community you are not welcome here, right? And that's the backdrop. Like that's the connection behind, taking a baseball bat to a car and then taking a baseball bat to an individual. And so I think there is a lot of usefulness to keeping the language sort of in use. I think the penalties part is where we get into problems, right? And I think the application of restorative justice has to be systemic. It can't be selectively used, so it ends up seeing as being a lighter sentence or less justice for the victims involved. But if you look at things overall, we also can't be used in a way so that we add more and more to a criminal justice system that even all the experts understand is broken, right? And that we don't end up rehabilitating anybody when we send them to jail and to prison. We just increase the chances that when they are released, they'll commit additional crimes, right? So I think restorative justice is an approach to try and say and to acknowledge that in California in recent times, we started spending more money on our prisons than we are in our schools, right? And there is no end in sight unless we start to get our heads around that. And so I think there's a way to still lift up and call out bias-related crime, bias-related incidents, whether it's in the school at the small scale level, from teasing to something as tragic as a murder, right? But we shouldn't let that be used to perpetuate a system that is already deeply racist and that's deeply flawed. So I think yes, but we need to be very, very smart about it.
Everyone's still thinking. There you go. There we go.
Thank you. Maybe to tackle this, I'd like to ask our panel the question. I heard it on the earlier seminar conference. If we've got to get and educate our community, what can we do? How do we reach the students, the kids, or the people that live here in San Francisco, or live in our communities, or live in our neighborhoods? I think that's, my quick thought is school district, or what? So the question is to you: how can we educate our kids? How do we tackle this?
Well, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the Korematsu Institute does send free teaching kits out to any teacher in the U.S. or even abroad, that just hasn't happened yet, who requests one of our kits. At this point, the kits focus on Fred Korematsu's personal story, the Japanese-American incarceration, and also contemporary post-9/11 civil rights issues. But we do have plans actually to expand our curriculum offerings so that we will be able to ship out an API heritage kit. And when that does happen, we would definitely include lesson plans about Vincent Chin and what it means.
And at the caucus, we give Know Your Rights trainings about the juvenile system, the criminal system, and rights with the police to youth. A lot of youth groups in San Francisco, after-school programs, and actually in the classroom, teachers often invite us to give a training. And I always push very hard for the youth not to just receive the training, but to become trainers themselves. And basically how the lesson goes is explain to them that you have a right to be at school and to learn and to not be bullied. And if you are being bullied and the school knows about it and you're reporting it and nothing's happening, your actually right to an equal education is being impinged upon, and that's a violation of your rights. And if you respond to that violence and that bullying with violence, you get funneled into our juvenile system, which will be very awful for you and your family. And I explain how strict our laws are in California, in particular against assault, robbery, etc. All the things that youth sometimes get charged with when they're fighting back. And so that's part of the training that we give. And it's been a very interesting experience. I think we've trained several thousand youth so far just in the San Francisco area. And I think the most exciting time I had doing it is teaching it to a group of students at Thurgood Marshall High School, a group of Chinese American youth. And then they went and gave that training 2 weeks later to a group of middle school students. And they did it so much better than we did it because they used all these games and all these role plays and these scenarios that I think hit really close to home for the middle school students.
I have another suggestion. For anyone who's interested in teaching students about Vincent Chin, I would also say Curtis Chin has made this amazing film for us, and at 40 minutes it actually works within a 50-minute time period. So if there's a specific school that you have in mind, ask the principal there, ask a teacher there, what are they doing for API Heritage Month? Hopefully it's not serving just egg rolls in the cafeteria or something like that, which I see all too often. Not that there's anything wrong with egg rolls and food, but we're about a lot more than that. So I think, thankfully we do have, and certainly it's not that API history is only relevant in May, but we do have that month where it seems that administrators and companies and whatnot do, highlight and really want to put in good programming. Curtis has done such an amazing job with outreach on his film, and if there's any funding involved, you can probably get the school to bring in Curtis and he could be a guest speaker. I think that'd be a great way to educate teens.
Thank you, Reverend. Ethnic studies. Vincent, before we go on to ethnic studies, what do you have to say?
Well, I think, Barry, there's the different pieces that need to be taught, right? And I think if it's the story of Vincent Chin, there are more and more resources that are more and more accessible because of online, because of Korematsu Institute, because of these documentaries. I think as a community, we've got to support some of the institutions that create these resources, and whether that's CAM or Hyphen Magazine, Apex, right? This, we have to support our own ability to tell our own stories, as Zahra said. At the same time, we are increasingly represented in the mainstream, but we need to understand that our approach should be to infiltrate, not to assimilate. That we have lots of Asian Americans who may be helping to write the Pew report, but haven't thought about, okay, what are the consequences of, or how do I speak up? And we see this in our school district, and we see this in our city government, that we do have representation. How much that representation has translated into empowerment or to liberation or inclusion, I think is still, a question mark. And I think the last thing, which is, not necessarily about Vincent Chin, the name, right, but how do we learn the lessons from that, right? And then I think we have to basically engage in the practice of it. More and more opportunities from people of different backgrounds to, one, share power, actually know one another, and pursue some common goals. And that can be as simple as a block party where folks who are neighbors don't know one another and they're afraid of one another because they look different. And again, there's many places in San Francisco where we have this problem. To things that are a little bit more ambitious in the schools, and just taking a look, how segregated are our sports teams? How segregated are some of our artistic performances? And leaning into and saying there is a value to having diversity if it gets people to understand, one another, if it gets people to pursue some common goals. What are the stories behind those young men who were involved in Vincent Chin as the assailants? What was the education, and their experience that made it so easy for them to dehumanize a fellow human being, right? And how can we make sure that all of our schools and our institutional practices think about that as we understand, well, how do we set up programs in our schools? How do we try and have diverse schools, as a whole? So I think that that practice of creating, shared space with shared power and some shared goals is something we can, do all on our own in different ways, but also institutionally.
Thank you. That kind of took care of the ethnic studies question. Anyone else have questions out there?
Hi, I just want to thank all of us for being here today and continuing this conversation. I really want to thank Zahra, I wish she was here, for making that comment about, how we're all here kind of preaching to the choir and who is not here in this conversation. And I think this is important to me as someone being born and raised in Oakland and continually seeing the violence that goes on. As specifically, I think about Brandy Martell, the transgender woman who was murdered. And that really touches me on a very human level. And so for me, I want to challenge us as a group. How do we continue these conversations in a very community-oriented way to have the people who are not here today be at the table having these conversations around why incidences like Brandy Martell and Vincent Chin happen, and creating that awareness and understanding that is important. I mean, I want to challenge all of us as a group to really think about what are the tools that we can use now and what are the different ways in which we can understand our identities and how we organize around that too as well, I think.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I had a response / question. I don't really know what I'm going to say, but I don't know, RJ or Mike, or if either of you know, in your conversations or hundreds of emails with Curtis in order to organize this event, were Ronald Ebens or Michael Neitz ever invited to the table? I know when Angela's talking about restorative justice, I can't help but think, I believe both of them are still living. I know that one of them lives in Nevada, so maybe you know?
Well, I know that when I had my play world premiere in West Virginia, which was the theater that commissioned the play about Vincent Chin, they were invited to participate in a conversation with Helen. And they did not actually come, but they sent a representative to say that they felt that they had been tried, the case had been tried 3 times. Once when they were given the 3-year probation and $3,000 fine. Once when the stepson was let off and the father was continued to appeal, and then the final when they moved the federal court civil rights case to Cincinnati, when he was also his sentence was overturned. So they felt that they have already paid, and that bringing all this up again was really a waste and demonizing them all over again. Because if you looked at the Who Killed Vincent Chin video, and they actually interviewed them, they had no sense at all that they did anything wrong. They didn't feel like, I mean, the camera's right in front of their face, and they didn't feel that there was value to Vincent Chin's life. There just was no comprehension that they had done something wrong. And so they were asked, and this was in 1997, I believe, when the play opened. So I know that they did have a chance to respond.
So a couple things about restorative justice. It is voluntary. So if it's voluntary. It's not used to determine if someone's innocent or guilty. So in order for it to have happened in this case, they would have had to admit that they are guilty and voluntarily go into this. So that is one of the limits of restorative justice, and it's also part of why it's successful, and it reduces reoffense rates. Another thing about restorative justice is it doesn't have to happen at the arrest prosecution stage. It can actually happen while someone's sitting and serving their time in prison. I've actually spent a full day with the RSVP program, which is a program that we have in our San Francisco jail in San Bruno, where the prisoners, actually not all of them, just groups that voluntarily want to do this, will spend, I believe it's like a Wednesday or a Thursday every single week, spending the entire day thinking about what they did to the person they harmed, and specifically talking about it to each other. And they will call each other out when someone's being dishonest and is showing off about what they did, and they're not fully discussing how much harm they caused to the person they harmed. That's why they're spending time in jail. So there's many ways that restorative justice can be used. And one more last thing is I wanted to point out that I've worked with Asian parents who have been the victims of hate crimes, who have used restorative justice, and it's been interesting to see it happen. These are Asian immigrants whose primary language is not English, and they've been harmed sometimes by African American youth. And in one particular case, I called up the mother and I said, I just want to tell you the story of this youth, not to forgive him, not to excuse him, just so that you know it, because you probably want to know a little bit about, what is this person and why did they do this stuff to you? And I explained this youth's childhood, their mother being a prostitute, this child being basically on his own for most of his life, and rolling with a group of youth that he got his confidence from, and doing very, very bad things with these groups of youth. And then at the end of the story, I asked the mother, given this information, what would you like to happen to this youth? Because you can have a say if we use more of a restorative justice approach to even the criminal court case. I can tell the judge, or you can come and tell the judge exactly what you want behind closed doors, and that might impact the case. Do you want this kid to go to a state prison, which they could go to for what they did to you, which was extremely violent? Or would you like them go to a group home that's on the East Coast that actually looks like a college, and that gives this kid a chance to actually have an education, and they might actually graduate and end up in college? A lot of the kids that go to this group home do. And the mother said, and this is like a 50-some-year-old Chinese immigrant mother, said that I would not want the same thing to happen to my child as a mother. And for me to know that he's had a childhood like this, I feel very sad for him. And I would very much like for him to go to the group home. So when we conveyed that story to the judge, that's where the kid ended up, and I think he's doing quite well. So there are some very interesting success stories, but there's also some limits to RJ. So if the two offenders in this case didn't want to participate, they don't have to.
I don't know if this is restorative justice or not, but just today, this morning, on the OUDF website, Emil Guillermo, who blogs for OUDF, I think that's Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, actually published what he called an exclusive interview with Richard Ebbins. And in that interview, and you can read it for yourself and judge whether he was being sincere or not. And Emil was actually very neutral in the way he wrote it. And he basically promised Richard that he would get his say. And he gave Richard his say. Richard apologized. He says every day he thinks about what he did, and he wished that he could have thought about it before chasing after Vincent Chin over at McDonald's with a baseball bat. He knows now that it was a mistake, and he wishes that every day he could have taken that action back. But he also knows it's too late and there's nothing he can do to take it back. He also played the sympathy card and says, look, I'm in Nevada, I've gone from minimum wage job to minimum wage job. So he tried to win a little sympathy as well. But I just wanted to bring that up because I really believe that he is suffering a little, and whether we believe he's sincere or not in his apology, And as far as I know, that's the first time he's ever apologized. I thought it was a significant step forward.
You know, there's Vincent Chin that, you know, and I think what happens is that we make these myths, and they mean something more than they may have at the time. And we can do a disservice in a different way by dehumanizing the fact that, you know, there were real people involved. I think that at the same time, it does become a myth, and that Vincent Chin now has lived longer in death than he did in life. You know, that he didn't make it to 30. And so I think that how we understand what happened and what are the ways we want to retell it, and I think it's important to have folks retell it in all sorts of ways, very powerful, and that it won't be long before, you know, the Vincent Chin, the person, will be less and less remembered than Vincent Chin, the story. The hypotheticals that can get involved here, you know, like what had happened in this case if the, you know, if the judge had thrown the book at the perpetrators? You know, would there have been sort of this uprising that has led to so many, we can say, positive things now, right? You know, and so I think that we still need to press because, you know, it's important to get things right. But we do have this opportunity in this moment to figure out, well, what are the lessons we want to learn as a community, and what are the lessons we want to retell?